Hey folks, this is going to be a live chat with myself and Stephanie Brown of Created Brown, visual artist and all around super cool person. So, as soon as she's able to click on, we're going to start our chat. I'm not going to say too much about Stephanie until she actually comes on. There she is. Hey. So, go ahead and request whenever you can, and we'll jump in. Let's see. Here we go. Hey.
Can you see me? Wait,
I
let's turn
can,
this.
yes, I can see you.
Oh, that's great. I can't see myself.
You want to click off and try to rejoin
Yeah.
while we're early in the process? Hello, Awake Warrior. Thank you for stopping by. Hey, they Floyd. So Stephanie is going to rejoin. There she is, because she couldn't see herself. So this time it should work. I'm excited.
There.
There we go. Yeah, so that happened to me before too on a live once where I was looking at a black screen the whole chat.
Yeah, it was weird. I was just like, I'd rather not. I mean, it's
Right.
fine as long as you can see me and it works. I guess that's all that matters.
Yes, and I love your glasses as usual, and
Thank
your
you.
hair's gotten longer.
It has.
Just since February, actually.
It has. Your hair loves to grow when you do nothing to it, right? So
That's true.
your
Absolutely.
hair's grown too.
It has.
Inches.
I said I was gonna let it grow. I wasn't gonna cut it until after I got tenure. So I have 4 more years. So we'll see where it goes from there.
You might change
Um,
your mind by then.
you're right, because that's a long time. Well, anyway, so I'm super excited that we get to talk again.
Yay.
Um, I kind of want to let you do like any kind of intro that you might want to give the audience before we get started. I have a few talking points, but of course, we could just chop it up organically as things flow as well. But I'll let you just kind of give your initial intro.
Sure. My name is Stephanie Brown. I am a interdisciplinary artist based in Atlanta, Georgia now. My background is in photography from Savannah College of Art and Design, and I have an MFA from the University of Michigan in interdisciplinary art. And in between undergrad and graduate school, my work really shifted. I think I took a year and a half, almost 2 years off in between. And for me, I got really great advice from some really great mentors saying that I really need to figure out what I want to say as an artist.
Mm.
And I didn't really know what that was. So I didn't go to grad school right away, and instead I took a job overseas. And that job overseas is important because that is where my broader introduction to colorism came from. And that broader introduction then became an internal one through grad school,
Mm.
doing all this research. So my work is really rooted in understanding identity construction. I am passionate about how people of color come to understand who they are. I've taken my own journey of figuring out who the hell I am to transferring that into learning experiences that I can create through interactive installations, photography series. And I was really, really rooted in the idea that no matter where you go, there's an inferiority of brown skin. And no matter where you go, people who identify as Black are othered in some way, shape, or form. And I really wanted to understand, one, why that was, and how do we shape who we are knowing that and growing up around that. We're just surrounded by so many biases, whether they're implicit or explicit, like all over the place. So that's what pretty much, I just gave you a synopsis of my thesis. And it's really it really became life's work for me. It truly became something that it wasn't just a thesis for me. It wasn't just something I was going to study for the short term. I learned so much about myself in the process of making this work and doing this research that I've really become committed to it. And you know, the more you learn, the more you see it everywhere. So here I am now.
Yes. So I think at some point we're going to have to get you to unpack, right? When you say you learned so much about yourself, I think I would
Yeah,
love to like have you dive into that. But since we did title this Do Not Bleach, sort of just an unofficial title based on a specific project that you have, can you talk about that specific project and maybe other projects? Because I've seen some of your work in person even, which I love. I'm so excited. Yeah, so just talk about some of the specific art pieces that you have around that theme.
sure. So Do Not Bleach probably became one of my more popular installation works. And installation was very new to me. So it's difficult as an artist to go from one medium to the next. Um, Even though I didn't necessarily discard photography, photography is very much so rooted in the body of work. But as still considered like an emerging artist, most people are just like, wait, I know you for photos, but what is this other thing? So Do Not Bleach was a study looking at the use of laundry symbols, so laundry care symbols. So I was looking at all of these symbols and I thought that they're really fascinating. I wasn't quite sure what I was going to do with it yet. But in researching laundry care symbols, I was also researching a lot of old like advertising ads from the 1920s, 30s, 40s, 50s. And I was seeing a thread. I was seeing a commonality between this literal use of blackness or black bodies or the word black or the color black as dirty and something you don't want and like get away. And this literal use of the color white and the idea of whiteness and white people and white bodies as clean and what we want and what we want to go for. So we see that in ads all over the place. It's very easy to Google and find. So I think it's really important for me in my work to, I don't care to perpetuate stereotypes and I don't care to perpetuate problems, right? So instead, I was thinking, how can I intervene? How can I take these laundry care symbols and not necessarily change their meaning because I'm still very true to what the laundry care symbol means, do not bleach, but how can I use that as a tool for empowerment? And actually, it was a mentor of mine that inspired me to experiment on different color shirts. I knew for sure that I wanted it to be wearable. So the Do Not Bleach project resulted in black t-shirts that go through a screen printing process with discharge paste. And it's a clear gel that goes onto the material and it eats away at the fabric. So it's essentially like a fabric safe bleach. Don't go Cloroxing your clothes, people. So there's a real process for this. And when heat is applied, it eats away at the fabric and you are left with the remnants. What was there before the shirt actually became black or had whatever color it was. And what I loved about this process is that it's kind of random. Black shirts live all different kinds of lives. If a neon yellow shirt in the textile world doesn't sell well, they'll actually dye it black and sell it as a black shirt. I haven't been able to run into that example just yet, but I know that it's a possibility when working with black cotton fabrics. So I really appreciated the duality of this idea that you can bleach this thing safely and it still not actually become white. You get this great range of sepia tones depending on how much discharge paste you use. But all of the shades are brown and they're very representative of all the shades and tones that we literally come in as well. So the shirts were meant to be a physical symbol, a silent opportunity to advocate for yourself. So on the front of the shirt, it has the Do Not Bleach sign, and on the back, it says the words Do Not Bleach. And in the installation, I have Now I'm in the hundreds of portraits of people that I've taken. So I've taken the shirts with me on my travels. I've gotten people who, people who identify as Black, and I think that's important to say because not every Black person looks how we think they're supposed to look,
Mm-hmm.
and that was really important for this work because I had very white passing Black people or First Nations people who were very much so interested in the work and it and connected with it. There's like, I want to buy this shirt or I want to take a picture and be a part of this work. And that was important for them. And I think that when people look at the sea of faces on the wall and this giant, portrait collage of how the work is shown, I think it's a really big symbol for people to just remember how varied our shades come in. But the work is more than just do not bleach your skin. It's also do not bleach my language. This idea of whitewashing so many other aspects of ourselves from not just our skin color, but our hair, our terminology, the words we use, how we do our makeup, how we dress, where we're from, all these things that I think it's very easy for Black people to want to disassociate themselves with out of shame or misunderstanding. And I just love the way to utilize that work. Another pairing that I've done is I've also used another laundry care symbol that looks like a crown. And I commissioned a set of soaps to be made based off of Rihanna's not essential, but her first set of colors. She's got even more now when she came out with her Fenty foundational beauty line. And we know that that was a historic moment.
Right.
Finally having a makeup brand that highlighted all shades. And it truly wasn't even just about people of darker skin and varied brown skins, but her line even had more palettes for even fairer of fair skin as well. So that piece is an installation of soaps on the wall, and they're embedded with these laundry care symbols that are shaped like a crown, and they're hand painted in gold. And viewers are encouraged to not touch them, but put their hands up against them to just kind of see where they fit. And it's this idea of just seeing where all of our skin colors merge and blend, and to see the colors alone, separate from a body, separate from a gender, really says something, I think, because we're just so varied, but it's very easy to judge once you've got more to look at. So to kind of separate the skin color from there and to really pay attention to the hues and the undertones that we have that are beautiful and gorgeous. One other work that I've done that's colorism related was a satire piece called Mulatto Fast Tanning Lotion. And that was also featured in your show that you did. And that's probably my boldest work. And it's kind of underrated because it hasn't been shown very much. But Mulatto Fast Tanning Lotion, I essentially I created my own tanning lotion brand, called it Mulatto Fast Tanning Lotion. And at the appearance of it, looks like a bottle you'd see on the shelf. It's displayed in a very commercial way, like if you went to an Ulta where you would find it. And then on the body of the bottle, you'll actually be reading a message from me explaining how this idea of fast tanning to become browner is like modern day blackface.
Yeah. I remember that piece very well. You said so many things. I was taking some notes, but I think your work can say so many things about Blackness, for example. I'll start with that one. I love the idea of not perpetuating stereotypes and problems, but looking for tools of empowerment, right? And when I think about do not bleach the shirts, right? And what you were saying about how Black shirts are made, how any color shirt, or like the life of a black shirt could be very varied, right? Like black shirts could have prior lives that, you know, get covered over, literally get covered over. And I'm thinking that reminds me so much about how the actual category or identity of Blackness works, right? It seems like it can cover a multitude of identities. You know, does that make sense? Like a
Yeah.
multitude of identities can be become Black, right? Or be considered Black in a way. And so I think it's very interesting that what you're doing is not peeling away, but exposing, you know, sort of that reality that there is so much more than the flattening or the monolithic application of the term, right? Like there's so much variety underneath the category of Blackness, right? There's so much history and depth and variance underneath that label of Blackness, right? And that's, I'm not saying that because I think the Blackness itself is not sufficient, right? Like, oh, it's only interesting if it has something else under it. But what I'm saying is that it's just the historical reality of what Blackness is, right?
Sure.
And a lot of times that process was used politically, even thinking about how in the United States, for example, who was classified as Black on the census during slavery was particularly strategic in terms of being able to enslave more people, right? Even thinking about immigration policies during the founding years of this country, where lawmakers were deciding who they would classify as Black, right? Okay, are these people going to be classified as Black, or are they going to be classified as white? Because if we classify them as white, then we have to give them freedom. We have to give them rights. And we have to allow them to vote. And we have to allow them to own land, right? So does it benefit us to classify them as white or Black, right? So I think that there's so much historical parallel there in between like the way Blackness is applied to people and how Blackness is applied to apparel and clothing. That was so interesting. I like that you said figuring out what you want to say as an artist, right? And so I kind of am curious to know where you are in that process, right? And maybe tying into that, how did you come to be an artist or identify as an artist, especially as a Black woman? And then maybe even if you want to, you can throw in the whole intersection that you speak of being not just a Black woman, but you're specifically at the intersection of Jamaican ancestry and African-American ancestry as a Black woman.
Yeah. That's a 3, 4, 5 part.
I know. But I know you can handle it. I know you can handle it of all people.
It's funny to think about where I am as an artist today. It's been a journey. It still is. I've been doing some recent writing about this actually, because I feel like I'm at a point where my skill sets are actually consolidating. I felt for a long time that I was on many different paths, not really, you know, I'm always trying to practice what I preach and do what makes me happy. But there's also the reality of you have to sacrifice sometimes and maybe do something you don't necessarily love for a while as well, so that you can get to where you want to be. But I realized that I've actually done a pretty darn good job at sticking to my guns and doing, you know, what actually makes me happy. And I think it has a lot to do with my mother's very stubborn, and I definitely get this from her. I'm just so determined. I am not, I don't know how to think that I can't do it. Now, that's not to say that I don't have low points, because I definitely do. I struggle with anxiety, which I didn't even formally come to terms with until the end of last year. I think I had my first kind of public panic attack the end of grad school, and I didn't even know what that was. I was explaining it to a friend, and she's just like, "You had a panic attack?" And I'm like, "Is that what that is?" And she's like, "Yeah." And then from that moment, I kind of was able to start recognizing where I've had these before. I just didn't have the language for it, and I didn't really know how to navigate it prior to. But technically, I hate the terms like emerging and established artists and all that stuff, because they kind of really don't mean anything other than like your literal market value. And I haven't actually sold a lot of work. I've shown in a lot of places. I'm definitely proud of the work that I've made, but I don't have like a large collector base or receipts to show, you know, of work that I've shown. So technically, I'm still considered like an emerging artist, but I feel grounded in my practice now. I don't feel like I'm just making art to make art and we're just throwing things up against the wall and see what sticks. I think I'm very intentional about what I do and why I do it. I come from a very artistic background. My mom done it all: crafts maker, basket maker, sewing, baking, cooking, catering, like all of that. And all of my siblings as well. I'm the youngest of 5. And it's very typical Caribbean, not even just Caribbean, but immigrant mentality, you know? We come to America for a better life, and you have these opportunities to become a lawyer or a doctor. The end. That's great that you're creative. That's great that you can take some pictures. That's great that you can do that. Awesome. Side hustle.
Right.
Lawyer, doctor. And then my mom said, because I was so smart, I was supposed to be a surgeon, where she had the nurse title for most of her daughters and doctors for her sons, because, you know, generational gender biases and restrictions. But at some point she thought, you know, like, you could be a surgeon. I'm like, thank you so much for that compliment, but I think no. But yeah, I think how I've come to understand myself, being a first-generation American, is a part of my bio that I never leave out. Being of Jamaican descent is a part of my bio that I just can never leave out, because I didn't know what it meant to be African American. I learned what that was and what that means in school. And not even like my teacher teaching me, but just through the community of being around other African American students, questioning my own identity. When I went to Jamaica, some would, you know, my family members would be like, yeah, of course, you're Jamaican. Your parents were Jamaican. But then I would go there and some people are like, oh, you were born in America. You're a yardie. Or, you know, like, you're not really Jamaican.
Yeah.
And then, but back in the US, this idea of, you know, oh, were you born there? No. Okay, so then you're American. You're not Jamaican. And I'm like, well, what does it mean to be American? Like, and then for a long time, I was saying that the only thing American about me was my birth certificate. Because my parents worked very hard to have a very particular upbringing for all of their kids. They tried their best to make it like our house was, when we walked through the door, we weren't in America anymore. We were in Jamaica, but in South Florida.
Right.
But I think just looking back, I've been able to really reflect on the language that my parents used, specifically my mother. You know, she was always very interested if the friends I was making were white or black. She would have no problem if they were white, but she'd be very strict and concerned if they were black. Growing up hearing the phrase, don't be like those African Americans, was a very common thing. And, you know, she honestly wasn't trying to be malicious, but she's a product of her generation, and she's a product of what she's been taught. So even Black people from other countries coming to America, they have this picture of who and what Black Americans are. And they adopt that. So how do we divorce from that? And I think I finally like filed and signed my divorce papers through like my college years. Because we think and we say that, oh, we're not like that. We're not like our parents. We don't think that way. And then you have to get into a point where you're really like hyper analyzing your language, what you're saying, what you're doing. I mean, just from like, even just with other Caribbean people, you know, this elitist that Jamaicans are up here and other islands are down here, and like, come on. You know, so there's a lot of unlearning that I think we all have to do as adults, no matter where we're from, even as a Black person, you know, from the Caribbean or from another country, that just really compounds onto it all. So that's always been my entry point into doing a lot of identity construction work, and why I became so interested in understanding how other people identify, because I was realizing that I didn't even know how to identify. And my use of even saying things like first generation American or Jamaican descendant was really a prideful ego thing for me to say, I'm not just American.
Yeah. Yes.
You know, like I've realized I've always been finding ways to separate myself from America. And it's hard because as a child of immigrant parents, your parents have this view of America's the place to be. This is where you go, land of opportunity. And then what I grew up and have come to learn and know about America, I'm just like disgusted. And I'm just like, ugh, how could, you know, there's such great idea of a thing, but you've been so bad to people who look like me and continue to be systematically. Like, how can I be excited to rep you?
Yes, that's so interesting too. And the fact it's so interesting to me as someone, because I feel similarly about America, right? It's like, but I don't have any other option, right? Well, not literally, but
not right now.
Like growing up, I couldn't say, well, my parents are from, the Caribbean, so I don't have to rep hard for America. I don't have to rep America like that. That for a long time, that felt like my only choice. Like, well, this is what I got. Like, really? But I love the conversation that you're bringing up about, like, in terms of the African diaspora and Black people from all parts of the world and how we perceive each other, right? Because we know just within the United States, right, African Americans, how we perceive each other within this country, right? There's classism and elitism and separatism, and there's the legacy of colorism, of course, right? But then when you think about internationally how we perceive each other, I definitely feel what you were saying about how Black people outside the U.S. look at Black Americans, or African Americans, I guess, to use the colloquial term, as somehow like wanting to separate themselves, right? Wanting to like not identify with themselves. And Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie's book, Americana, talks a lot about that, right? Like being the Nigerian immigrant coming to the US and wanting to make it very clear that, no, I am a Nigerian immigrant. I am not one of those African Americans, right? They are, loud and hood and uneducated, and we are not that, right?
All the things that white society wants to paint us as.
Exactly, right. And you think about like who dominates the narrative of who African Americans are for the rest of the world. It is white media, right?
Yes.
It is the white entertainment industry at the end of the day who has painted this picture for other people, even other Black people in other places. I remember even this guy who was a potential date saying that, that I had met online. He's like, well, I almost didn't respond to your post because people told, and this was a Nigerian man, right? And he was saying, I almost didn't respond to my post because people had told him to stay away from African American women. So it's like, I was like, and then he was like, but you seem different, you're educated. And I was like, no, this is not good.
Still a problem.
Right. So I think even in terms of like anti-Blackness, colorism is one thing, but even this sort of, I guess maybe tribalism is one way to describe it. And then of course I have to, hold my African American peeps accountable too, because I grew up, hearing Black people with accents being teased, right? Or, being told that
I was one.
Being told that they dress weird,
so white.
Right? Especially when we were growing up, right? Because I'm 35. So when I was growing up, this was before, the Black Lives Matter. We grew up in an era that was in between the Civil Rights Movement, in between the Black is Beautiful movement, but not quite at the point of the Black Lives Matter movement, right? So we had kind of lost a lot of Black pride, right? It wasn't cool to be pro-Black when I was growing up. It wasn't cool to like claim your African ancestry when I was growing up. Being called Black being called African booty scratcher, right? These were all used as insults, right?
Yeah.
Amongst young Black children, young Black kids, right? And so there really was like this disdain for all things African and all things, not African American even, right? So even if
Right.
it was Jamaican or, Haitian or something like that, anything other, this kind of strange xenophobia that some of us have, I think, it's something we have to overcome, right? And now that it's trendy to love Blackness and, people think twice before saying anti-Black things, that maybe opens the door for us to actually do the inner work, right? And not just make it for
Right.
show.
But how do we get past it just being trendy? Like I think
Yeah,
there's some
exactly.
benefit to it being trendy in terms of
Right,
like capitalist
right.
corporations and stuff. They might not believe it, but their ads are showing it, and that's okay. Like to a degree,
Yep.
that's okay because we need the representation and we need the backing, right? And that's how it helps move society forward to say,
Mm-hmm.
okay, this isn't okay anymore. It's like I can just imagine what it was like during that time period where people were like, oh, we don't use the word Negro anymore. Like just even that transition alone, like I can't even imagine what dinner or like cafeteria talk was.
Right.
Um, but yeah, I'm very interested in like how we go past making it trendy. But I think that a lot of it has to do with that internal work. Like we all have
Mm-hmm.
internal work to do.
Yeah.
Racism might be a white person problem that Black people just tend to talk about more. However, we as people who identify as Black, we have our own internal work to do to make
Mm-hmm.
sure
Mm-hmm.
we're driving our own narratives and we're not
Right.
determining what we can do and who we are based on this picture that white supremacists have painted for us or
Yes.
what our existing challenges are, because there's still existing challenges. There's still
Yes.
a gender pay gap and there's still racism in the workforce, so in colorism as well. So how do we have to know how to identify our own self-worth enough to even have
Mm-hmm.
the strength and power to want to navigate that. Because I can understand it being exhausting. I'm tired all
Yeah.
the time. But like I can't not. It's
Right.
either like give in, but I don't like the idea of who I would be giving in to. So I'd
Mm.
rather be tired.
Ooh, come on, Stephanie. I'd rather be. I love it. See, I knew this was gonna be a good chat. Gendell Crutch is saying, right, the trend helps push the internal work sometimes. I think for some people, the trend is going to be a catalyst for the inner work, right? That's what we have to hope for, is that the trendiness of it is going to sort of be like Velcro. Like maybe it has enough Velcro quality that the
Yeah.
people who are just passing by get stuck and like do more of the inner work. I also think it's up to us who are already past the trend to keep applying pressure, right? So
Yeah.
those of us who were already there, like we have to keep applying pressure on the trends
Yeah.
and not let ourselves, move on or get distracted or lose focus or whatever, and keep it, in the forefront. Just like we're keeping Breonna Taylor's name,
Yes.
in the, stream of social media, in the news, in the petitions and all that kind of thing. We have to do the same with all of the work around racial justice and all the forms of justice that we're fighting for, right? And I think too, the people who, like I was talking about earlier, that I grew up with people who teased you if you were African or if you looked what they thought a stereotypical African person looked like, right? Using derogatory terms, using Black as an insult. Those people are still alive today. The people who were making those jokes 10, 15, 20 years ago are still alive
Yeah.
today. And I venture to say that they are having a come to whoever deity they believe in moment, right? Where it's like, yo, I was anti-Black, right? And like, so a lot of people are having these epiphanies about themselves that could be painful, like you said, that could be exhausting. But I think, because I guess the tolerance, like the social tolerance has changed, I think if they go backwards, if they choose to go backwards instead of leaning into that epiphany and that change, then they're going to lose their circle, if that makes sense, right? Because
Yeah.
the tide is changing, you no longer have the community that's going to support those nasty jokes, that's going to condone your colorist behavior, right? And so even if they might be inclined to like kind of stick with their old attitudes, there's less and less support for that, you know? So that's my hope. um, so they are. So if anyone watching has questions for Stephanie or about art or anti-Blackness or anything you've heard, please drop them in the comments. And while
Yes, happy to
our
answer.
questions are comments, right? We'll read comments and answer questions. I kind of want to move into, so we have about 20 minutes left. And I kind of want to ask you, well, I'll ask you two things. You know, I'm good for compounding questions, but you have been like flawlessly navigating my random thoughts. So how in this work, in this effort, right? What would you say to people who are new to the idea of art as a form of protest or art as having a political implication, right? And then how can, so I'll leave it at that. I'll just give you one question for now.
Okay. That's a great question. I think sometimes we can overthink it, and I'm included in that we. Um, being anxious, even when I don't think I'm being anxious, like I can easily fall into like a loop of like overthinking everything. And a lot of my work is conceptual. So I would be very uncomfortable talking about or making anything about anything I can't back up or that I haven't researched for myself. But I think for people who are interested in creating any kind of work that they might deem social justice or activism work is to really just think about themselves. Think about what their situation is. Think about what they learned. I think that was the big shift for me. My mentor, India Beale, was at a point where she was looking at my work and when I was in grad school, and she was like, "This is all really great," and she's just like, "So where do you fit?" And I was like, "Huh." Let me get back to you. Because I had spent so much time researching other people and the situations and the history and the context that I didn't actually give myself a beat to see where I'm situated in it. And not to say that not every artist needs to necessarily share their own personal story or that kind of thing. But I think that we are research too. Like the internal work that we can do with ourselves is also a type of research that we can be doing. And I think that really shifted and really made my work stronger. I made a personal choice to want to be open and transparent about my stories and my upbringing and my personal experiences with colorism in my work. I know I've read some posts from people who feel like you're not an activist if you're not changing numbers, or, you know, if you don't have like dollar amounts behind it. And me personally, I think that's a little harsh because I think a lot can happen with a question. And that's kind of where I've been sitting for a while is let's ask questions, you know, and I think I'm more quick to ask someone a question, especially if you're engaging in like an uncomfortable conversation that's, you know, on anti-racism or Blackness or colorism, you know, nobody likes to be lectured at.
Yes.
So it's a different conversation when you start just asking questions, or when in your work you find moments or opportunities to intervene in an area that maybe has bothered you or that's been troubling. And I think those are all forms of social justice. Those are all forms of activism in your own particular way. I think there's too many ways to do it, and I think we'd be doing a disservice to limit the relationship between art and activism by just organizations or numbers and money raising. I think that those are all great forms, but we've got to be more inclusive in that bubble.
Yeah. Ooh, Stephanie. So you got chops. You got chops. I love it. A lot can happen with the question. I have to make a little quote post out of that, you know. I think too, I actually totally agree with you in that limiting activism or protest even to, I guess, quantifiable data, I think is limiting. Limiting protest to that is limiting. But I also think it's short-sighted. Because we can change, or we can seek to change numbers all day, but if we're not changing ideology, I think people underestimate how white supremacist ideology, how anti-Blackness, how racism is in the cultural fabric, in the ideological fabric of our society, right? So right. Focusing only on numbers ignores the fact that those numbers exist because the ideology existed first, right? Inequality exists because of racist ideology, right? There would be no structural or systemic inequalities if people were coming from a different framework, a different frame of mind about humanity and what it means to be human, right? So as soon, if we can like get to the core of the issue, which is how people think and what they believe and what they value, then we are going to see numbers change. We are going to see the quantifiable data shift as well. I think we need both, right? I'm not saying only focus on attitudes, although I do believe that attitudes lead action. But I think
they work together.
Yeah, exactly. I want to read some of these comments because they don't save when I save the live. So if I don't read them, then they're lost forever. Jandel Crutch says, I think there's so much courage to use your art to showcase your thinking on colorism, just as it is for darker skinned women of color to just speak up about it. That is true. It does take a lot of courage to tackle these issues in any form, whether it's, you speak on it or write about it or create paintings or sculptures or installations about it. It takes a lot of courage. It's a form of oppression to say your own personal story is not researched or activist enough. Almost like the activism is a show instead of a change process. Now that is a good point, right? Activism for the sake of being seen. Oh, that might step on some toes. If we can't see it, then it's not real. Does that make sense? I think that's kind of what Janelle Crutch is saying. Like, people are saying it's only real if you can like show us something, right? As if that inner work, as if changing your mind about dark skin is not important and valid. I think, man, that was
And it's interesting to even think about that comment and where we are right now too, right? Because this idea of more people being at home, and there is something different about this moment in time compared to, we've experienced the killings of Black bodies, in large numbers and short periods of times before. But I think there's something different about, one, us also dealing with a pandemic, and two, with more people being home. But I do see more conversation about this idea of it being a white issue, or what things that white people need to do, or what the white community needs to be thinking about. And I think that's all really important, because as long as the people who are oppressing us don't see it as a problem, then none of our stats, none of our, marches, like none of that is going to carry the weight that it can. Until, that's why we need both. It's both and, right? Like, we need the marches, we need the protests, we need the activism online and offline, but we also need that internal work. We also need to be asking questions. We also need to be challenging our white counterparts to practice what they preach and own up to what they say. You feel so bad, so okay, then what? What are you about to do now?
And I think that is a good point too, in terms of like changing ideas and changing minds and hearts, right? Changing hearts and minds, right? People talk about that. We just need to change hearts and minds. And I do think that is safe for white people to say, well, my heart is in the right place, but I'm not going to put myself on the line. I'm not going to speak up in a board meeting. I'm not going to, put your resume at the top of the pile because my colleagues might look at me. You know what I mean? Right? So I do, and that's why I think, I understand that we need to have specific action behind the attitudes, right? We need to have specific action behind the ideology, right? But I also think that it's hard to get people to act if they don't first change their minds. Um, the Colorism Project says activism for being seen. There's no such thing. LOL. Real Dr. Tampa. People have time to think and reflect. We're not busy keeping our head down and just trying to work and pay bills. Rachel Jones. Hey, Rachel. Shout out. I've gotten more committee offers lately, but if I'm filling a position, are really going to be heard remains to be seen. Absolutely. Yeah. Because that's the flip side, right? People kind of like what you were saying about the companies, right? Changing the name or doing things, putting Black people in their commercials all of a sudden, having diverse advertisements all of a sudden. I've been seeing so many advertisements with a Black person at a keyboard or a Black person tying their shoes. I'm like, oh, all of a sudden now, every commercial.
Finally in 2020.
Right? So the other side, you can either have an attitude and not do something, but you can do things that don't have any substance behind them either, right? And I think for the Colorism Project, I think that's kind of what maybe empty activism or kind of like performative activism, like performative allyship, right?
Yeah,
you're really just doing it because you want people to keep spending their money with you. Or because you don't want to get called out on Twitter. So you're going to put this stuff out there, but you're not committed to the cause. There's no risk on your part, that kind of thing. She says we can type.
Yes, we can.
Yes, we can. I kind of,
without looking.
In the last 13 minutes, because I also want to have at least a couple of minutes, because Instagram will cut us off. Just cut it off. For marginalized people in particular, for Black people, having to cope with the psychological stresses, the generational traumas, the burdens, the physical burdens, the healthcare disparities, and all that we have to cope with, right? As Black, Indigenous, variously marginalized people. I want to kind of see what your thoughts are on how we can use arts or artful living, right, as part of our coping mechanisms, as part of how we maintain joy for ourselves and create space for ourselves and sort of show up for ourselves, right? How could we use creativity, broadly speaking, towards that end as well?
I think everyone's creative in a certain way.
Mm-hmm.
Of tapping into that, but sometimes you don't have to. It's like someone who's loves art, but maybe they're not an artist or they don't identify as an artist for themselves, right? But you have the ability to enjoy it, to appreciate it, to want to dissect it, see more of it, maybe even collect it. I think it's helpful. There's a global mindset of the diaspora that I wish for all people who look like us or identify with us, because it's such a game changer. And I get that, I've had the privileged opportunity to be able to travel and to be able to work overseas. And that's not an opportunity that's accessible to everyone, nor is that something that everyone has necessarily any desire to be on a plane for more than 6 hours either, right? But, we have the internet, we have so many resources, we have books, we have libraries, and I think that to kind of absorb art in all of its forms, not just the traditional painting, drawing, but music, theater, dance. I mean, we have to remember that there's so much more to our culture and what our people have created beyond hip hop and rap. And as a collective, we are a global majority. And that's where having that global perspective of just how creative we are, just how much melanated people across the globe have achieved, for the arts, for culture. I think that plays such a huge influence in self-care and how we see ourselves. And if we're going to dream a new dream for ourselves and who we are, then we need those examples, not just here within the US, but on a global scale, so that we see, well, what's happening in Switzerland, what's happening in South Africa, what's happening in Puerto Rico, what's happening in Chile. Like, we're everywhere. There isn't a place that we're not.
Yes. Oh, that was so beautiful. If we are going to dream a new dream for ourselves, I love it. And I agree with you. I think that global perspective does give us hope. Like in the simplest terms, like knowing that there's more than just the small window that I can see through, right? That there are people who look like me, who identify with me, who have similar ancestry as me, similar beliefs and values as me exist there. And that's especially important for Black people, brown people who might work at a white institution, right? Especially young people sitting in a classroom and all your peers are white, or on the Zoom call and all your peers are in your neighborhood and there are Trump signs everywhere, right? Remembering that there's more to the world than just what you see right here in this instant, right? That there is a nation of people, right? A globe of people who identify with you. And I think having that be a source of hope, just knowing that they're out there, right? But then, like what you were saying about our creativity, like you talked about your Jamaican mother and all the varied forms that she was creative, right? She was creative in terms of cooking, making, doing hair, the way we dress, right? I was talking to someone about saying, the way the necklace I wear, the earrings I choose to wear, right? Bringing in that creativity and that sort of artful living however we can. Right. And I tell people too, like, you don't have to have a lot of money to live in luxury. It's really about your perception of what you already have, right? Yep. So if you take your little, Dollar General pen that you got from the dollar store and you treat it like it is $100 pen, then it's going to feel like $100 pen to you, right? And so if you can't afford to buy a $10,000 painting, look the picture on your Instagram feed, right? Literally, if you're watching this, that means you have access to Instagram. So, you know what I mean? Like, follow artists, right? Bring that into your life. Follow people who make cool things on Etsy, right? Bring that sort of creativity and appreciate it as if you just bought, a $10,000 painting to hang in your hallway, right?
Imagine if we did that for ourselves.
Yes.
Like the same way you treat that dollar pen as if it's $100. Imagine if we treated ourselves that way.
Yes, yes. And I think we run the risk of having an elitist view of art, right? So often we say, well, art is not accessible to, marginalized groups or communities of color or poor people. And I think certain kinds of art might not be accessible to us, but art in a more general sense has always been accessible, has always been a part of our lives. And so I want us, like, as part of our affirmations for ourselves, is to recognize that we have always been an artful people. We've always been a people of creativity and beauty, right? And, finery in various forms. Again, even the intricate styles of cornrows, right, that we have invented. So with that, I'll say one affirmation. Let's see. I'll say I am able to find beauty and joy in the everyday, right? So that would be my affirmation. And then I'd like Stephanie to leave with anything you want to say, any closing words for our people who are watching. And then also remember to let them know how they can follow and support you.
Sure. I'll say that part first. My website is stephanievphotos.com. You can see my work. If you want to learn more about the Do Not Bleach project or even buy a shirt for yourself, you can go to createdbrown.com. There's also links in my story highlights on my Instagram @createdbrown. And I think what I'd leave to say is in the vein and the idea of thinking about dreaming a new dream for yourself, um, really expand your way of thinking, expand who you are, question everything that you think you love, everything that you think you love to
Mm.
wear, and just ask yourself why.
Mm.
And
Mm.
don't be afraid to discard something that maybe you might have been known for, or a hairstyle that you got tired of. Um, and if your community and if your network doesn't allow you to dream a new dream or expand the thought that you want to think of, look to other references, look to your ancestry, even, because we all have these capabilities within us, and it might not be in a living line that you were able to meet, but that doesn't mean it's not already in you from previous ancestry.
Definitely. Woo, okay. Also, speaking of shirts, I love the shirt you're wearing. Can you show it off? Yes. All right, folks. I love Stephanie. I met Stephanie through the writing contest. As you can see for yourselves, she's an amazing, dynamic woman, and please follow her. If you're watching this live, you should be able to click at the top of your screen on her name or our names, and then just follow her profile from there. But if not, it'll be tagged on my page indefinitely, and in the previous post, she's also tagged, so we can follow her and all the beauty that she's putting out in the world through her art, but also just as herself. All right. So thank you, Stephanie. This has been awesome.
Thanks for
And
having
we'll have to
me. I
talk
miss
again
you.
soon. I know, right? And so after this quarantine, I'm going to have to come to Atlanta. Yes. And that
We
way
got a
we can
place
see
for
each other
you.
in person. So Stephanie and I met like in 2017 virtually. And then in February of this year, we met in person at a CAA conference, and we were on a
Yep.
panel together, right? So I love like when virtual friends become like in-person friends.
Yes.
So we'll have to get in person again when we can, for sure. But folks are saying, yeah, thank you, prayer signs, right? Thank you all for tuning in and for watching. Be sure to share this video with other people that might be interested in it. All right, take care.
See
Bye.
ya.
Thank you.